I'm back. It's now time for our panel on strategic thinkers for a comprehensive discussion about how the 50-plus community voted in this election. Ashley Rich Stevenson is Vice President and National Political Director at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Stevenson leads the Chamber's voter education program. She's also an experienced pollster and has worked on a number of high-level... She's worked throughout the entire political establishment. Go check out her Vita. It's really, really cool. Minion Moore is the same, is an author, filmmaker, political strategist, principal at Dewey Square Group. I hang out a lot. She specializes in building brand awareness strategies for corporations. She used to be, as I understand it, the CEO of the DNC. So we're covering the gamut. And finally, Nancy Lamont, Executive Vice President, Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer at AARP. She knows virtually more about this subject than anyone I know. And she particularly knows a lot about the mindset of the 50-plus voter and how they impacted this election. It's great to see all of you. We're going to have Mark Penn on a little bit. He's willing to go out in public as a pollster, right? Maybe the only one right now. But Mark told me something a long time ago. He said, in every race, at the time I talked, he says, every race turns into a choice between fish and steak or between mango ice cream and mint chocolate chip. Like there's always going to be these differences that come up. And let me just start with Minion. As kind of look at it, what I'm interested in when it comes to, again, we can talk about which way voters went, but I think what are the dividing lines, if there are any? What is on the dashboard, the priority list for the 50-plus, the 65-plus voter as you see it out there? Minion?
Well, it's some of your speakers before us really kind of hit on things, but I think COVID is probably one thing that is looming large in the 50-plus community. And, as a person that is proudly 50-plus, I often think about that, too, as I quarantine in my own home. But I also think about my mother, who I haven't seen since March.
Right.
And, she has particular illnesses. But I think having AARP really seriously at this point at the helm, it really makes it easier. And healthcare in general, I think it's just a big, big, big issue. And another thing that I think is that 50 plus are faced with is caregivers. People who have to take care of aging parents and aging family members. So I think all of these things will come into play in this administration as well as in our own personal lives.
Mignon, thank you. Ashley, how do you see those lines right now and what's on the dashboard that matters? And I just want to throw in, make a look, because you're the chamber, and I pay a lot of attention to the chamber right now. I fear that one of the things we're not talking about enough is that regardless of the COVID relief package, regardless of what's happened, the eviction moratorium is coming to an end. You have a lot of people that continue to be laid off in financial circumstances. Some don't have direct lines to health care. And also, I'm going to go to Richard Louie's, my friend from MSNBC's big show tonight on caregiving and called Sky Blossom. And there's a whole range of caregiving that has been disrupted and suspended. So I'd love to know, from the chamber perspective, what you worry about in the middle of, what is an ongoing crisis, really.
Sure. Well, the first and foremost thing is the chamber has been very clear on our calls on Congress from a bipartisan effort to pass additional pandemic relief. And the first bullet on this, and this is a fresh press release that we just put out, must include more testing and healthcare. That's an absolute top priority. And there are a number of bullets below that touch on all of what was discussed prior to our panel starting. And it's our top priority, will continue to be until additional relief is passed. And we know that this is critical for seniors. There are fewer pieces of research that I follow more closely as a political practitioner than what the AARP puts out, and did so really well through the last year in a number of big states where we were focused from a U.S. Senate perspective. And I would say nationally, something that we were following closely, just to pivot back to the political environment quickly, is about 3 or 4 weeks ago, heading into November 3rd, we saw right around the time that the president was diagnosed as positive with COVID-19, the numbers for his reelection and those of his administration dropped significantly among seniors. And this led at least 7 days of a news cycle, which, as you all know, is a lifetime in politics. That had serious ramifications, I think, for the way this election played out at the top of the ticket. And we've seen it in some of these exit polling numbers as well with seniors.
Let me be unfair to both Ashley and to Mignon for a minute before I go to Nancy. You know, I was aware that the chamber has supported a couple of dozen Democratic House members in this recent election. Mignon, I know you hang out with all sides, but you know the Democrat. You know, is there enough of an overlap of those circles that you think that there is the beginning of possibilities of getting, I don't know what to call it, nonpartisan, bipartisan, postpartisan look at some of these agenda items for the 50-plus community out there? Mignon?
You know, go ahead, Ashley. Please
No,
go
Mignon.
first. Oh, okay. You know what? I think that's what probably the pressing question of the day, not just for 50 plus, but for America. And the good news is there are many of us that have bipartisan relationships. And I also believe that in a person like Joe Biden, who came out the Senate, who did cross the aisles, who did have relationships with people, I think he has an opportunity to set a tone for the country. But I also think in the House, if we are going to get something done, we must work together. People are exhausted. The fatigue, I'm sure Ashley has seen it in the polling, the fatigue level is great. So we have to appeal as citizens for them to work together.
Ashley?
And the chamber is not a partisan organization.
Right.
We support men and women from both sides of the aisle who indicate a willingness to work together to get things done. An additional pandemic relief for seniors, for employers and small business owners, and those relying on the government for steps forward on all the things that have been touched on is mission critical. And I think when you look at the results of this election, we are likely to have a split government with perhaps a single-digit majority in the U.S. House. There is absolutely, Steve, enough overlap between all of these priorities from different parts of the spectrum that something will get done.
Well, that heartens me. Well, let me jump to my friend Nancy Lamont. Nancy, I've quoted you a few times today on, the future of retirement is work. But let me ask you for a minute. This election, as Ashley just laid out, single-digit majority, didn't necessarily, nobody got this one right? It's all different. But my question to you is, anyone that did get elected, do they owe your crowd?
Well, we think most of them do, and we're still looking at all of the numbers, so we'll be able to meet with everybody and talk to them specifically. Look, one thing is clear, and we're delighted with increased turnout across age groups, but older Americans were the biggest age segment in the electorate. They turned out, they always turn out, and remember, in midterms, typically, the older voter is an even bigger part. As I think the Congresswoman said earlier,
and not to interrupt,
we
but
also
I want to
saw.
wait, Nancy. I just want to interrupt one moment. Not to interrupt, but just to clarify that point. Older voters also increased their share of the pie. In other words, proportionately, they showed up in greater. So not just absolute numbers; it's proportionally bigger than they already were big. Bigger,
right,
bigger,
especially
bigger.
those over 65.
Right.
And I think to the points both Ashley and Mignon made, it's hard to overstate how important COVID is to an older American. We hear every day that we're the most vulnerable group, very focused on it. And I think the implications of this moving forward is that there will be an incredible amount of focus on what bipartisan efforts there are to continue to deal with the health aspects and the economic results of COVID. And the advice I give anybody who will meet with me is don't take for granted the important role you're going to play in educating Americans, particularly older Americans, on the vaccine and what is still to come.
Let me ask you a question, Nancy, and I'm trying to figure out how to ask it the right way. I'm just winging it. But I did feel one of the reasons that I wanted to produce this set of events is that while I was calling America's most reliable voter, America's most important voter, I also felt if you really step back and are honest, these voters are the most taken for granted voters. I've asked a couple of members of Congress and they said, no. But do you think that is an accurate assessment, that this class of voters is taken for granted in ways they matter in elections, and then we talk about millennials? I mean, how do you think we need to square that?
Well, first of all, we're all fascinated with millennials, and especially older people. But it is true that in the election cycle, people look at the numbers and they know that they have to address the concerns of older voters. And then we reach post-election. And the question really is, and it goes to what you've asked before, what issues are going to be addressed? And are they going to be addressed in a bipartisan way, which is how most older voters want to see the country move ahead? And we think that's hugely important. For many years, I talked to members and they would say, if they were on the Democratic side, well, that's just a predictable Republican vote. And that has changed in the last two election cycles. More older Americans have moved to Democrats in both the 2018 election and in many parts of the country in 2020. And it's a segment that's growing. We think it's time to really focus now on issues important to them, and that is healthcare, the economy. You talked to Representative Neal a few minutes ago, retirement security, and the two standbys, Social Security and Medicare. People say all the time, oh, I know they care about Social Security and Medicare. The fact of the matter is they really care about Social Security and Medicare. And it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. If you're an older American, those two issues are at the top of your list.
We're going to go to a question from the audience in a moment, but I want to ask Ashley and Mignon a question. Since I've been doing these forums online, I feel like the question that haunts me right now when I look at American society and I look at the economy and I look at the stakeholders in this, we've just seen major strife and divisions in the country over race, not only over the murder of George Floyd, but Breonna Taylor, others, Ahmaud Arbery, others. We have economic hardship in the country and we have health hardship in the country in these different tsunamis. And so you're smart people and you run in these networks, and I know government can't solve everything, and sometimes it's private-public partnerships, sometimes it's something we hadn't seen before out there. But I'm interested in what you see as our blind spots in this discussion, that if we are going to move the needle towards a more inclusive society that works, where the economy is working for more people, where it's a more inclusive equation. I know you both work on this. What are some of the things you'd like to put on the table for our audience that we really need to begin thinking about? Mignon?
I use this analogy all the time. When you put 5 people in a room, you put a bag over their head, and that person is hungry. That person wants college education for their children. That person wants a decent home. That you can't tell what color it is. So on one level, we all have to say to ourselves, can we see ourselves as Americans? Can we see each other? And I think for a long time, we lost sight of the fact that we are all in this together, that humanity has to surface. And, not that I want to be partisan, but the fact of the matter is, I believe that Joe Biden will bring the country back together. That bully pulpit at the White House is powerful, and it can lead us in the right direction and it can lead us in the awfully wrong direction. So I do think that this country has to heal. And I do think that we're not all going to get what we want, but we need to get what we need to. And, we need to stand down a little bit and just listen to each other a little more. And so I'm hoping that, after we saw what was going on Saturday, people were jubilant. Everybody was happy. There was something raised our hope in the country again. And I'm hoping that we can capitalize on that.
Thank you for that. Ashley, your thoughts?
Sure. I think that we all have become so accustomed to living in what is an extremely partisan political environment, perhaps the most red versus blue than any of us have ever lived or worked through. And frankly, I was pleased to see last week that voters really delivered a message loud and clear. And that is one in support of what looks to be potentially divided government. I think that's a good thing from a negotiation standpoint. And I couldn't agree more with Mignon that regardless of where you are on the partisan spectrum, when a new person is elected president and there's going to be a new administration, it is time to hit the reset button and have some hope and be positive about it. And I always believe in that personally. And certainly on behalf of the business community, we know that we have to all work together to move forward and get around what has been an extremely challenging year. And there still is a lot more of it to come. But good news this week with the potential vaccine. Great news that we saw that the market certainly liked with Pfizer on Monday. And we know that the market likes divided government as well. So I personally am very hopeful that we are going to move forward, be able to work across partisan lines, pass another round of relief that's going to help everybody in this nation when we need it.
We should say, before I jump to Nancy for a quick thought on that, we'll go to our question. I also would say another under-discussed subject is really, if you look in communities and what businesses have done in this time of crisis, it's incredible. I mean, there are lots of heroes out there, frontline workers and others, but I also just want to punctuate that point that businesses have done extraordinary things at levels that don't often get visibility. Nancy, your quick thoughts on this?
We are very hopeful that Republicans and Democrats and independents will all come together and will be able to enact legislation that is very important, in our case, especially for people over the age of 50. We think there are a lot of opportunities. I mentioned the big issues, but also on issues like family caregiving.
Right.
That was a topic that was always off to the side, and now it's front and center. There are very few positive contributions COVID has made, but it has certainly shown a light on family caregivers and their vital role. They are the new healthcare provider group, no question about it.
Are you going to the Kennedy Center tonight?
Pardon me?
Nancy, are you going to the Kennedy Center tonight to watch the outdoor cars, watching Richard Louis' show on caregiving, Sky Blossom? That's as
no,
much of
I'll be watching it from my virtual place.
Excellent. Okay. Well, look, we got a question from the audience. Algernon?
Hello, my name is Algernon Austin, and I'm a Maryland voter. My question is about retirement security for low-wage workers. As you all may be aware, many low-wage workers, blue-collar workers, pink-collar workers work in jobs that don't provide retirement benefits, or they don't earn enough that they can save in retirement accounts. So for many of these workers, Social Security is their only source of retirement income. Additionally, many of these workers are forced to retire early because of workplace injuries, because of disabilities, because of health-related problems. So they don't receive their full Social Security benefits. So my question is, what do you propose to do to strengthen the finances of Social Security? And what do you propose can be done to increase the retirement income for these workers who have been forced to retire early?
Thank you. Ashley.
Well, first, to just answer this through a political lens, and it was already mentioned earlier in the segment, that this is not a partisan issue. And this is why you hear members of both sides of the aisle constantly saying that we must protect and defend Social Security at all measures, no matter what it takes. And it was articulated very well ahead of this segment, the impactfulness and criticalness of this and what Social Security is now facing as a result of the ramifications of COVID-19 and tremendously high unemployment. New numbers out this morning that show still 704,000 applied for unemployment over the last week. So I certainly defer to Nancy as the true expert in this space, but it's clear that it's not a partisan issue, and that's why you hear good candidates and electeds talking about it through that lens.
Thank you. Mignon, your thoughts?
I couldn't add anything to Ashley on this. She's absolutely right. And obviously we have the expert on the phone, so I don't want to take up much time pontificating when I know the expert's going to speak. But I agree with Ashley 100%.
Well, I'm going to go to Nancy for the last word, but one of the things that Richard Neal, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, put on the table was a kind of savings account where employers could begin putting money aside for their employees without requiring them to match. This would be a huge revolution in eventually getting some dollars behind workers who often have been stymied by their inability because they have so many other scrambling to pay the bill costs. So I think it was very important what he said today. I think it also responded. Nancy, your final word and final thoughts in reaction to Algernon.
Well, and I agree with Ashley and Mignon. We have to find a way to ensure that Social Security is solvent, that it's adequate, and it's there for future generations. Every generation has a stake in Social Security. And at the same time, we have to continue to build our private retirement system. The numbers are staggering at how little people at around age 50 have saved for retirement. And so proposals like the bipartisan legislation led by Representative Neal is going to be very, very important in order to ensure that our workers, when they leave the workforce, have both personal savings and also Social Security to rely on.
Well, it's a fascinating conversation. I do feel like we're at an inflection point. I love talking with the three of you. I hope we can do it again. It was really, really fun. Ashley Rich Stevenson, Vice President, National Political Director of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, right around the corner from me right now, in fact. Mignon Moore, Principal of Dewey Square Group, and Nancy Lamont, of course, Executive Vice President at AARP. And Nancy, thank you for supporting today's program, but you belong on this panel to discuss things as they were. So thank all of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.